So I wanted to start discussing the Asar Malchus. Now, I've spoken about this in the past. It's gotten me in some trouble sometimes. Let's try to organize this properly. Now, the truth is that if you look through Chazal, and by Chazal I mean strictly Bavli, Yerushalmi, the earliest sources in Chazal, obviously Mishnayos, Toseftas, Braisos, Gemara, Bavli, Yerushalmi, etc. You'll find some of the deaths of these Asar Malchus mentioned, but more on an individual level. There's the death of Rabbi Akiva, something that's discussed. Rabbi Akiva actually, it seems, and I don't know if we know exactly how long he was in prison for, but Rabbi Akiva was in prison for a while. It wasn't for 5 minutes because there's many conversations that took place. What's interesting is that Turnus Rufus, who was the commander, the general, he prosecuted the case himself. Meaning in Chazal throughout Chazal, many of the conversations that Rabbi Akiva had with Turnus Rufus, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Gemara in Baba Basra, Rabbi Akiva was different psakim. That was exactly the truth. Is let's leave Rabbi Akiva. Possibly Rabbi Akiva we could talk about tomorrow, but in the later on, after the Chasimus HaTalmud, call it I don't know, in the 600s-700s, just to put it in a vague idea, there began to be a widely found concept in the Midrashim talking about the Asar Malchus, grouping them together as a group, as Asar Malchus, providing some sort of like exoskeleton, like a framework to understand how and why they were put to death, what it stands for, what it means to us, what the lessons are. But those are slightly later than in, the Gemara itself. The Gemara itself refers to some of these deaths and tells us some anecdotes, some stories, some pratim of these deaths, but not in like a coherent overview type of way. Like these are the 10 people that were killed for these reasons, X, Y, and Z. That's not there. That's a later thing that does develop in Midrashim, but in primarily where it finds its home is in Piyutim. Piyutim is where this idea really thrived on a very high level. And this is one of the most widely popularized motifs of a piyut is the number 10. 10 is a great structure for piyutim. Asar Sadibris, Asar Malchus, Uchadayma, there's Asar Mamaris. Mishnah Pirkei Avos already groups things in 10. 10 is a great number for piyutim, and taka in many piyutim for not just Asar Malchus. The number 10 is a good framework to use. But in regards to the Asar Malchus, the idea of the 10 Talmidei Chachamim with 10 Gedolim that were put to death for Klal Yisrael, for whatever we'll see, became a very popular way. And there's a sefer Mosad Cook put out a while ago. There's be'erach 30, 20 something, high 20s of piyutim that are structured about the Asar Malchus. Now we know some of the famous ones. On Yom Kippur we say Eila Eskara, and on Tisha B'av we say Arzei Levanon. These are two I don't know if it's centerpieces of the davening in both of their times, right? Because there's something very poignant and touching and dramatic about these piyutim. Sai on Yom Kippur and Sai on Tisha B'av, these are very dramatic piyutim. And the kinna and the piyut, and they seem to have garnered for themselves a certain pride of place. But there are with these type of things. Nobody chooses to prioritize one piyut over another. Nisana Toikif is not the centerpiece of davening because when it was made, it was meant to be a centerpiece. It became a centerpiece. Sometimes later piyutim supersede older piyutim. There's no way to know. Klal Yisrael has a good nose. Klal Yisrael chooses, I guess, what really captures, what evokes the flavor of the day, and that becomes something that's sick. So the piyut of Asar Malchus is something that's in every cries of Klal Yisrael. L'mashal, I'm saying obviously the Litvish, the Sfardim, there's so many different versions of this piyut. Let's say the Yemenites have them. The Nusach Romania, which today is a non-existent Nusach, has its own. Provence, which is again another non-existent Nusach that was rolled into the common Nuschayos, has its own. Ashkenaz has. Italy has. North Africa, from Iraq, Iran, Eretz Yisrael. There's so many different versions of this piyut. Now, what stands out to me, what's interesting about this, is that if you look through the piyutim, there's probably it's probably 20 different arrangements of the names and the order and the seder of how they were killed, meaning literally the seder advarim of who's included and what the order of their inclusion is and the name, so many different composites of who makes it in. Now we have the ones that we have. The one that we say in Tisha B'av, I think only includes 6 or 7 names. I think in Kippur also. I don't think we have the full 10 listed in our piyutim. Our popular piyutim, Asar Malchus, don't have a full 10. it talks about them as the Asar Malchus, and then it continues on into a more, like a granular level. It discusses like particular stories or particular ones of them, and it doesn't really give us the full comprehensive list. But in some of them, there is more comprehensive list. Some have 10, some have less than 10. Now, what's interesting is that this is not something that just in Piyutim is vague like that. In the Midrashim as well, where the Asar Malchus, where this whole like motif of the Asar Malchus as a group killed for a specific Aveira takes shape, these Midrashim from, call it the 6, 7, 800, it's hard to know exactly when every one of these Midrashim, I'm not here to talk about Medrash today, exactly every one of those Midrashim was when the book was closed, like when the final manuscript was prepared, and who was the final person who put his hand on the parchment. It's hard to know a lot of times, but those early Midrashim, from after the Chasimus Talmud until, call it the end of the Tkufa Zagayna, maybe even touching the Rishonim's Tkufa, some of them were still being edited, have in themselves, some could just be a Gersa mistake, but between 6 and 8 different versions of who the Asar Malchus are. So it's far from conclusive exactly who and why and what the actual story of the Asar Malchus was. Meaning it's a very like blank canvas of sorts. Even in these early Midrashim that are talking about it, there's several different ones. Now what's interesting is that I'm not into Gematrias, but if you're into Gematrias, you could take these lists of the different Tanoim who were killed and try to get Keneged the Shvatim, to match with the Gematrias. And there are various different lists that work better or worse. You have to figure out who goes in the list of the Shvatim, because really only 9 of the Shvatim participated. Reuven wasn't there, Binyamin wasn't there, Yosef was the victim, so it's 9 of the Shvatim participated. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's Tarif Imam HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so which name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what the Gematria is. It's fun. If you like Gematrias, you could try to figure out how every one of these, lists could. What do you say? Well, so one second. I want to talk about that. That's what I'm sure I want to talk about. 1 second. So that's if you, I'm saying now, just to highlight, I guess, how stark the vagueness and the kilo of this is. As much as it's something that's so well documented, meaning there's so many of these 5 or 6 versions of early Midrashim, of late Midrashim, not early for us, but late Midrashim that discuss it, and 20-something versions of a Piyut that discuss it, it itself locking down exactly how the story transpired and why was it an einish and the thing is not so clear. Ad Kedei Kach that I'll read you something from the Shalshalas HaKabbalah says. The Shalshalas HaKabbalah is a 400 or 500-year-old sefer. It is a little bit lucky in its credibility. Definitely later Talmidei Chachamim question things that it said in there. It's not, it's an old sefer, but it's not the highest, tier, Messiah sefer. But in there, he writes something crazy. He says like this. He says, "V'roi sheteda ki kol yamahi sitaya asher nishalti ba'apiyah tanamarim b'yam kippurim b'yam tes ba'av k'nir b'chol ha'machzarim b'chol ha'shenis." My whole life, I found it strange. These piyut that we say on Yom Kippur and on Tisha B'av, it's in all the machzarim b'chol ha'shenis. I don't know what B'chol HaShenis means. He probably means all the Neschayos. Maybe he means it was translated Siddurim. I don't know, but I mean, he means to say it's a very popular and prevalent piyut. He says, "V'ner behem misas asaru gemalchas avor chet mechiras Yosef." And in there, it tells us the story of the Asar Shvatim being put to death for the chet mechiras Yosef. Ad she'amru ki shmois asar Shvatim shemachar Yosef sheim asara zulas Yosef midyamin oile b'misper shnei alafim taftaf nonches. He does one of the gematrias. People know there's a gematria that makes the shtim. If you put the right shvatim with the right names, it comes out a certain number. Everything works. He says, but I have so many questions about this. He says, Safek echad im acha Yosef chatu b'mechirasei asher b'zeh yiyu chayav m'knas v'zeki ein anshim el abdina degarmi. First of all, why they did something wrong, but it's only the Garmi. They didn't mean to kill him. They created some sort of delay system. It wasn't mamash misa. Safek Beis, he says, afilu shenekayim shechatu lahaniach. Let's say that they did an avera. Echi kablu b'nei macharei einish. Where does a child get an einish later on? Halei hanaviyim mitzavchem va'imrim banam le'yam so'alavas. It's psukim in Yirmiyah. It's replete throughout the Nevi'im. Children don't die for their father's sins. What does it mean that Klal Yisrael is paying for the sin, Darius later? He says, Safek Gimel, he says, even you want to tell me, not a kasha. Children could die for their parents' sins. So why these? How is this the einish for that? How is 1 + 1 = 2? Fine, you want to tell me 1 + 1 could equal 2. How is this the 1 + 1? He says, Safek Revi, he says, And in his thing, he's going to be masbig to say that the chacham that are listed in the Asar Machas were not in the same generation. It's a wide span of years, depending on what your list includes. The list could the amount of years for the Asar Machas to transpire could balloon up to 140 years. I think last time I checked, it's between 70 and 80 is a munach, meaning almost every nusach is going to have you that not all the people were killed at the same time. Some were killed b'shas the Churban, some were killed by Bar Kochva, some were killed even a little later than Bar Kochva. You're going to need to put a span of 70 years, 60, 70 years there minimum. According to the different eschayos, different versions, and this is a whole sugi to figure out who everyone on the list is, it could balloon to 140 years. So it's a huge merchak. It's not this like buttoned up straight story of like X, Y, and Z happened for X, Y, and Z. He says, I don't understand why them, why they weren't together, why not B'dar Echad. He says, Safek Hey, he says, Ki lo yimtza achaytim b'mechir el ates. V'zaki Reuven and Binyamin l'nimtu sham, v'ech hacham magdelim ha'yasar k'fi amunach. Why is 10 the number? It should be 9. It should be the Tish Asurim Harugi Malchus. 9's not a round number, so it's not, why 10? Where does the number 10 even come from? There was 9 Shvatim who did that It wasn't 10 Shvatim who did that Safek Shishi says, Eich le yizkuru prate elu asar saruge malchus, mi mehem neged shevet pleni achoyte. Why don't Chazal go into some detail and tell us that Shimon is connected this, and this is like you asking, who's connected, like, why don't Chazal tell us who's connected what's connected who? The Shvatim ostensibly probably didn't all play the exact same role in the story, right? Someone did this, someone did that, right? Let Chazal go into some detail and tell us. He played this role in me, the connected me, there's this. He played this role, meaning why is it so vague? Why is it just like there's a number we throw out there, but it doesn't fit in B'chal. Now, the way he asked the kasha is extremely harsh. He later on goes to try to give a teretz, but the kashas are better than the terutzim. He tries to work a way through, but he says like this. He says, he says, my first thought, my muskul rishon, he says, is ki sheker nachlu aveseinu lahamen sha'avasech lebeis v'shini banim tekehena v'lenergu kol hachacham mehem zulik tzasek suvim b'gemara. He says, first of all, my hergish rishon is that they lied to us. This is not how it happened. I'm reading you mila b'mila. My hergish, my muskul rishon is these people didn't. Kids weren't killed for the father. This is not how it was put together. The Gemara, which is the ultimate gold standard of a source, brings a few of the stories. It brings a Rakiva, brings a Yehuda ben Bava, it brings Chutz B'Sam Torgamon. Maybe I'm forgetting something. It brings a few. What is it? Right? It brings 4 or 5 martyrs in the Tkufa of it's more for the Mered Bar Kochva. It's not by the Churban. It's a little later. It brings a few of the things. So Chutz me those, he says. He brings it. I'm sorry. He says V'heim, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Rav Akiva, Rav Yehuda ben Bava, Chanina ben Tradian, Ukiyotze. And he says each one of them, the Gemara tells us why they were killed. This one was Makal Kilas Berabim, this one gave Smicha, this one did they violated particular Roman edicts, Roman laws. They were killed. It would be no different than someone who, granted it was Mesiras Nefesh or Shem Shemayim, but we know why they were killed. It wasn't like this grand cosmic plan to make up for the Aseres HaShvatim, for Mechiras Yosef. V'hapaitanim badu ze ha'inyan belibam. The Paitanim, he blames the Paitanim, the poem makers, badu inyan ze milibam lahavi meirach b'leiv ha'amoin, to make people sad. It's for dramatic effect. B'yam mehem shemimeinu v'tshuva. It's got to fit. This is the dramatic soundtrack that Klal Yisrael needs on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. I'm reading you Mila because when I paraphrase this, I get in trouble. I'm reading you Mila. Now, I am telling you the Shashal Sakabal is not considered chves. I'm not quoting you. He's a very early sefer, Reb Gedalia ibn Yechia. He's an old sefer, but it's not the gold standard. But this is what just to put the kasha into Gil, like stark relief. This is how he asked it. Now he gives his own teretz, and al pi Kabbalah, there's other terutzim, and al pi the Mikubalim, like the Rikanti and others, the Avinachal, the Rikanti, they say that these were Gilgulim, not just like these were the same Avis. These weren't like these Gilgulim and these different teretz, and there's a lot to say to answer these kashas. It's not really what I want to come to talk about today. I just wanted to point out that kilu, that narrative that the Piyat says that we say is built on a whole composite of different midrashim, different paitanim, that of course was questioned. Now I rather read a whole arichistic article if someone wants that I can send to you afterwards, that even in some of the midrashim, the nuschayos we have today give it as like fact, but in some older kisvei of these midrashim, it's discussed as b'lashon shaylo tshuva, meaning they said they're being killed for the Aseres HaShvatim. Mechatesa, how could you kill someone for that? It's done b'lashon shaylo tshuva, meaning it was still an open discussion. I don't know, 11, 12, 1300 years ago, this was still an openly discussed, what the Shashal Zakabal is asking, what we're talking about today, was an openly discussed question. It wasn't like, this is what it is, and now you cannot. It was something that was being discussed, it was being talked about. Some of the various midrashim even have it in there a little. There's a medrash that talks about Rishua saying it. Not what I'm here to talk about today. There is another nakuda in the medrash, It's in the Medrash Elaskara and in the Piyat Elaskara that's based on the Medrash. It's in the Medrash in Tehillim. It's in the Medrash in Echarabsi. Now, exactly which one's first, what the years are, not today Shmuz, I don't even know offhand, but in the Piyat that we say in Yom Kippur, it sounds like this: Elaskara v'nafshi elashpecha. Find it. Ki b'mei Kesar le'elsa arucha la'asara harugim melucha. During the times of the Kesar, this means Rome. This is talking about Turnus Rufus by the Mary of the Bar Kokhba, the Bar Kokhba revolt. There was no, there was nothing to save them. But Lamdei Sefer mipi meshulei aremas. He learned he got educated. V'heven v'diktek v'das v'shumas u'pasach v've'elim mishpatim v'chish v'zimras v'gunavish v'ganivish v'machar v'nims v'yad v'mayzuma. So the emperor became educated. Now, rather in Chazal, we find this emperor Turnus Rufus in particular discussing with Chazal various maimarim. So he was educated. And he said, "Chashtenish shteit in Torah v'guna v'shemachari v'nimtze b'yadei ma'isumas." So gava libe blial ovid alilim v'tziva l'malas patir na'alim kar la'asar cham gedelim b'vinu dasatam b'pulim. So here's where it says it right out the gate. It says he gathered 10 people together, 10 of the chacham, to call them into a throne room or a courtroom that was filled with props to highlight his taina. And he put shoes on the wall. And he says, "Dino mishpat zel ashura." Right? Everyone knows this. This is a famous piyut. And finally, he tells them v'guna v'shemachari. So they didn't know what to do. So it says. Zman Tnalon Ushleisha Yam they asked for Chalu V'Zo V'Namu Kulema B'Shmol Kohen Gadol Nasnei Neimer L'Haskas Hashem. He went up, fill in the blanks. Tir B'Shmol Atzmai, beautiful songs, right? Like the Shal Kabbalah said, it's poignant stuff. It serves a purpose. And B'Shmol goes up, and they asked, and they got a psak, and right from Yemais to Avos until now, there was never 10 Talmidei Chacham Tzadikim like you, and you're b'mkayim them, and this is the Einish Kach Nigzim Nishmayim, and they makabel the Einish on themselves, and then it proceeds to list the brutal and barbaric deaths of several of the Asari Gemachos. The doesn't go into the complete list. That's the piyut that it says over here. Now, putting aside the Nakud that we opened up with, about if it's this particular list and what the particular tkufa was, and Hulu, there's another Nakud over here. This piyut also gives a rationale. It gives a ruchniistic structure to understand why this is happening. Right? Klal Yisrael suffers a lot. Most of the time, we just say we don't know. We can't wrap our head around it. This piyut doesn't do that. This piyut is giving a justification almost, a justification for the suffering. You want to know why this happened? This happened because the Shvatim sold Yosef HaTzadik, and all these years that was an unrequited Aveira, it's something that was not resolved. And because that Aveira was not resolved, this is the next, you're the Angestellte, you're the ones who are here in place, and needs to be resolved. Actually, right before I was going to say shir, he showed me, I want to share this, it's beautiful Orach Chaim. Orach Chaim HaKadosh in Parshas Vayechi, when it says, the pasuk says, the brothers saw Vayiru Achi Yosef Kimes Aviyim Vayimru Lu Yistemenu. Now it's a shaila what Lu Yistemenu means. Now Chaim HaKadosh is like this. Dilma. Now Lu normally means halavai it should be. Like I wish that could have happened. Lu Yistemenu, like halavai you would hate us, like halavai you would take nakama from us, halavai you would punish us. Like what does it mean Lu Yistemenu? So Chaim HaKadosh says something interesting. He says they said Lu Yistemenu halavai we could get tshuva. Halavai, you'd punish us. You'd take some revenge, and we'd have tshuva, and this aver won't have to hang over our head and the heads of Klal Yisrael for deri deris. That's what our Chaim Taj. Lu Yistemenu is like the aver is unresolved. Lu Yistemenu, like you're leaving us hanging over here. You're being a tzaddik, and you're saying it's fine. Hatachas alekim anochi, Hashem chashav l'toiva. Yosef is mavater. Yosef said, nah, it ended up being a good thing. That Lu Yistemenu, like halavai, you'd resolve this now. So there's not something that Klal Yisrael has to resolve. Dairis into the future. Now, B'chalev and Shia, the piyut over here, is nemming on like this, and really Rabbeinu B'chai al Torah, and a few places mentioned this also, but the Midrashim really precede Rabbeinu B'chai even, are saying that there's some sort of structure over here to understand. Hey, Klal Yisrael has this unresolved Aveira B'chiris Yosef from the Asar Shvatim, from the Tisha Shvatim. So Mamela, there's an Einish that's going to come, and this is the Einish that comes to Klal Yisrael. Now, in there, so obviously the obvious question is, like the Shal Kabbalah is asking, where do you find that one dar gets punished for previous daras? So if you say like the Rikanti and the Arinachal, and maybe the Arizal held like this, that it was a Gilgul, so fine. So then it's Gilgulim, it's a different sugya. And Rabbeinu B'chai rather in his Pirush brings that this is one of the Makaris for Gilgul, like this is a Makar for Gilgul. But if you don't say like that, so what's going on over here? Now, I'm not here to resolve it, but I want to share a Meridik Cheshem Mishpat Shaila that really it grows out of this discussion. I think it's a fascinating thing. There's put yourself in Vilna in 1860. I know that's hard for some people here. Put yourself in Vilna in 1860. Vilna did not have a Rav. After the Gaon, there was no Rav in Vilna. There was a big fight with the last Rav in Vilna. The Gaon was not the Rav in Vilna either. Shmuel Avigdor, who was the last Rav in Vilna, did not get along with the Gaon. After the Gra, there was no Rav in Vilna. It was done as a sort of like deference, like to the Gaon, like there was no. Now, of course, there was Rabbanim in Vilna, and there was some very famous Rabbanim in Vilna. If you go to the cemetery in Vilna, there are Rabbanim in Vilna. Rav Chaim Ozer is a world-class Vilna Rav. the Binyan Shleim, the Cheshek Shleim, the Shleim HaKoyen, his brother B'Tzalel HaKoyen. There's a few Rabbanim, but the way Vilna was structured was be a Rosh HaBezdin instead of a Rav, and then there would be Dayanim like Matzim who would do and everyone had their own shuls. There was a lot of different things. Now, there's one of the unknown people who lived in Vilna at the time. I know nothing about him. If someone knows, feel free to share. But Rav Chaim Halevi Seglowitz, I don't know anything about him. He was a Rav in Vilna, a Dayan in Vilna, and he wrote a tshuva sefer called Makar Chaim. And in it, he has a fascinating shayla, a Maisa Shahaya that happened in Vilna, and a discussion that he later has with the Binyan Shleima, with the Shleima HaKoyen of Vilna, who was the more senior. He was like the Av Bezdin of Vilna, discussing the shayla. And here's the shayla that he asks like this. He says, shayla. Here's the story, he says. There was a city, a village somewhere near Vilna. I'll tell you the shayla. He says there was a guy who sold whiskey, homemade schnapps in his store, in his house. Now you needed to have, and he brings you needed to have a patent, like a permission slip, in order to be able to sell whiskey. Whiskey was a highly regulated business. The government made a ton of money from it. It got Jews in trouble plenty. Fill in any story about mashka and whatever I'm saying. This is a very familiar. What was it called? The rent system. It was a system that went on for a long time. He says the guy didn't have a patent to sell it. Now he had gotten into a fight with a guy in shul that morning. And his bar plugta, the guy who was upset at him, came into his store, and he says, Herzchaim Yankel, I would love to buy some schnapps. Could you take out your schnapps? And the minute the moicher takes out a schnapps, the guy who's upset at him takes his walking stick and gives it one big crack across the whole thing, and it breaks the entire bottle of schnapps on the counter and says, thank you for your service, and he walks out the door. So there's a mazik. He came in, the guy was upset, and he broke the entire barrel of schnapps that was there. Not 5 minutes later, the owner of the store just finished cleaning up from the schnapps, and in walks the inspector of the town, and he says, I got a report that there's illicit goods over here. I'm going to turn your store. Please go stand in the side room. I'm going to turn your store. Looks high, low, cannot find a thing. He says, it's funny because I could even smell it. I could practically smell it in here. I can't find the thing. And okay, so fine, you're off the hook. Now, had he been caught with his little vat of schnapps, it would have been a $10,000 fine. It would be a big fine. So now he goes to the owner of the store, and he says, Reuven takes Shimon to the Torah. He says, Shimon, you broke my bottle of schnapps. I want you to pay for it. It costs $1,000. Shimon says, I should pay you $1,000. Why don't you, let's split the difference. Why don't you pay me $5,000 and we'll call it a day? You would have had to pay $10,000. I saved you money. I did you a public service. Pay me the difference and we'll call it a day. This is the shayla that comes. This is the Makar Chaim shayla. So he says, he wants to know, he says, Shavar Avbaknik B'Shachach Zayin Zarav Ve'edim Avitim Al Nezek Oidim Abitim Al Nezek Bo Pisay Mamuna HaMelech V'Chavsu V'Lematzu Yayin Saraf. They came in, they couldn't find anything. V'Yichlu Lasis protocol, which I guess means to punish him. L'Chai Ve'Oinish V'Nitzel Al Yidei HaNezek Me'Oinish Rav M'Chai Ve'ish L'Shalom Avor Shavar Habakbuk V'Shafach Yayin Saraf. So, because Nimtz Sheish Tov Me'Ra, it ended up being good. This is the question that the Makar Chaim asks. Now, I think with the Hakdama that we gave, you could already see how this could be connected to our shayla that we were discussing, but we'll flesh this out a little bit more. Now, the Makar Chaim goes, and it's a Geshmak tshuva. Sometimes a tshuva, a Geshmak tshuva is the whole story. Meaning, he brings every chazal you could think of. It's a very Geshmak tshuva. It's not a long tshuva. Let me read through it basically, and then I want to read the Rav Shlomo HaKoyen's response, which is interesting, and that really ties it all together over here. He says like this: L'chayri nerishu patim l'shalim. He says, first of all, you should put him l'sham because there's a Gemara in Baba Kama Daf Zayin. These are all Bakanta Sugis that he's going to bring. The Gemara Baba Kama says like this: Amar Rabba, Zara Kli Mirosh Agag, Ubach Avashibri B'Machel Pater, Damrin Alei Manatvir Tavar. Very famous Gemara. The Gemara Baba Kama in the second parak says, if you throw a Kli Mirosh Agag, someone comes on the bottom and greets it with a stick and breaks it, it's Pater Damrin Alei Manatvir Tavar. V'chein Pasku Kala Poiskim, as is Gepaskin in Rambam and Rif and Rosh and Shulchan Aruch. That's the halacha. That's how it's Gepaskin in Kain. Hachanami Levad Sheyatzalei Tovim Mizesh Shavar. Nish Ner that he give him a favor, that he do good by him, that you say you broke it and he didn't get the einish. Harim Loye Shavar Hayalakacham Munas Hayayin Tzarf. Either way, it was headed to be confiscated. When the policeman came in, he was going to confiscate this barrel of booze anyhow. It's Manatvir Tavar is all I broke, and came Manatvir Tavar. So Dr. Achmed Divrei Taisvis. I just want to tell you, every raised eyebrow to one of these things over here is all, the Binyan Shleimi gets to all of them. So just hold it in. Of course, these are sketchy tushtels that need, yes, absolutely. And the Binyan Shleimi gets, these are vakanta sugis. Everyone's going to get to the Nukud over here. So he says, Taisvis makes a pasha chalik. Taisvis says over there, Neradim achar zarak evan echetz ala keli ubachar v'kadam shiva the pshita dechayev le'shayich hamonat v'yirtavar u'misvar pshuti lechalek min zerik evan zerik li'atmin at kodashani. He says v'imkein hachanam pshita the dam le'zerik chetz v'amishaber chayev. So pasha that's not a good tushtel. This is like Taisvis. It's dam le'zerik chetz, and this is not going to be part. This is not monat v'yirtavar. That's right out the gate. The Ben Yishleim will talk about this. Then he says, "Va'odnerly raya the chayev." He says, "Nishno them is this not a raya that you potter? I even have a raya that you chayev." He says, "V'hadam mitziyah daflam and vav and beis." This is a more complicated Gemara. The Gemara says like this: Pasha b'viyatzel le'agam u'meisa. You were a shomer who was watching an animal. You were pasheya in the shmira, and the animal went out into the agam, into the field, into the whatever the swamp, and it died. U'meisa. So it's a machlekes Abaye and Rava. Rava says you potter malachamavas malihacham malihasam, and the Gemara says, but maidi Rava kolhecha de igneva ganav ba'agam, and then u'meisa kedarka beganav the chayev. If a ganav would come to the agam and steal it, and then in the ganav's house it would die, then the ganav's chayev. My timer, the shavka malachamavis bebeisa the ganva have a kaima, because even if the malachamavis would have left it alone, it would have been in the ganav's house. So you can't tell me that I'm potter malachamavis malihacham malihasam. No, you're a ganav if you stole it. So zakter, Memela, I think that over here also he says Vim Kain. He says, the din over here is that the shemer is chayav from the minute that it was stolen. The shemer doesn't lose his chayav anymore. The says, I would think that this is a good sushtal to that. This is daimeh to someone stole it while it was in the agam, and only later on did it die. So the fact that it died later on, and now there's a svar of malachamavas malihacham malihasam, that doesn't pat you retroactively from a chayav that you already became mechuyev. You're already mechuyev. It's too late. It says over here also, you came and you broke the meicher's schnapps. It doesn't matter that later on, a few minutes later, the policeman came in and now it would have been monetary recover. You broke it, you're chayev. You break it, you pay. It doesn't matter. It doesn't go off the thing later. Now, ach b'kolzeh says nearly the potter, and here is his like punchline. He says, I think I found the makar. You should be potter. Now, what he bases it on is the Gemara Menachos. The Gemara Menachos is like this. The Gemara the Gemara Menachos has an interesting shaila. And the Samach Dalad Amid Aleph, the Gemara says a shaila like this: Shama shetava tinik b'yam. If a person heard that a baby drowned in the water, upirish mitzuda lahales dagim, and he spread a mitzuda to get fish, v'hela dagim chayev, lahales dagim v'hela dagim v'tinik, Rava mer chayev, Rabba mer potter. Rabba says you potter, and that's how we pass him, by the way. V'ad kan Rabba like a potter, elakivin the shama. You heard about it. Amri nami daite atinik. Avaloi shama loy. V'ekad amri hainu pluktayu even if loy shama. And then Rabba holds potter. What do you say? Because that's how we paskin Rava and potter Rabba and potter. Why? And this is how we paskin because zil basar ma'asav. Rava Mechayev zil basar machshavasei. Rabba says zil basar ma'asav. That's the tzimseif the Gemara. The way the Gemara seems to conclude is that we hold like Rabba, and this is gepaskin in Rambam. I don't think this is in Shulchan Aruch. It's in Shulchan Aruch also. Oh, okay, good. So it's in Shulchan Aruch too. That we paskin like Rabba that zil basar ma'asav. Heyos, you did a ma'asa that turned out to be a hatzala. It was hatzalas nefashos, and it wasn't just harming. It wasn't being mechal Shabbos. You're not chayav. So Zakta as follows. He says, I think near the potter. Since I broke it, I saved you from paying a big bill. I did you a big taiva. My makar for this idea that zilbas amaisev, and I look at it as if I saved you from the Gemara Menachos. He brings the whole Gemara. Then he says, "Mashim l'chol gavna shemrak helatinik." As I pot them shem degloil afraid the shaparav. Them came gam kan benidin didan. Afshem mitchila avid lehazik sheshavel leakeli yain sarv. V'chol zeh achar kach nimtza she'asli taiva b'zeh as I potter. Zilbas amaisev. The ma'aser that you did was a ma'aser to help him himself. Even though judged on its own when the ma'aser transpired, we presumed it to be a ma'aser of hazik and you'd be chayev. But some safe, this was a ma'aser of hatzal and you potter. He says ve'ein leimer. Then he has a different zaytik kasha. What about mamayna meisur le'alfinan? This is Isser. This is Shabbos. This is what Shaykh is mamayna. So he brings a chacham tzvi that mamayna meisur le'alfinan. Some good to have in your pocket. Chacham tzvi says mamayna meisur le'alfinan only the chayev mammon. Lifter mammon we learn. Okay, Sam, good to have in your pocket. Lifter mammon we do learn mamayna meisura. So this you have it. Now. Zakta as follows, but there's a problem. He says, this is all good, cheshem mishpat. You want to know if you chayev money, you potter money, you're potter. Ach, zayis nirali shebedina shemayim muchayev. He says, I think that you still have a dina shemayim dekachiv. Why? Ke'en sha'amru chazal benazir b'kedushin. Now we'll see this Gemara in a second. Like Chazal saying in the Gemara in Kedushin, misha neschaven lechol basa chazir v'al b'yad basa tleh, amr Torah tzricha kapara v'slicha. The Torah says if you mischaven lechol basa chazir v'al b'yad basa tleh, you need a kapara v'slicha. So here also, you neschaven to break a guy's thing, to be mazik him, to punish him, to harm him. Later on, it turns out that it was good. Okay, that's not your cheshbon. Yichayv b'din shemayim, Zakter. Now, what's the Gemara that he's referring to? It's a fascinating Gemara, and I want to read the Gemara because it will be relevant in the Binyan Shleimus Tshuva. The Gemara says like this. It's a mission on Nazir in Daf Chav Gimel Amid Aleph. It says like this: Isha shenadur b'Nazir, v'yisha shaisa b'yayin, v'tamal amesim, v'reizes sefeges zarbaim. But Hafer Labaila, if her husband was made for the nether, Vahila Yada Shefer Labaila, Vaisa Shoysa Biyayin, Matam Lamesim, Ainus Vegas Arbam, she doesn't get Malchus. Dr. Gemara, Tanur Abanon, Isha Aferim Vashem Misachol. The Torah says, we just landed, maybe? I think we just landed today, right? It's Matis? I think. Isha Afer, her husband was made for the Nedarim, Vashem Misachol. Dr. Gemara, Isha Shafer Labaila, Vahila Yada Kasam Medaber, she Tzricha Kapara Vaslicha, a woman whose husband was made for her the nether, she had no knowledge of it, she needs a Tzricha Kapara. When Rabbi Akiva would get to this pasuk, he would cry. He would say, "Mami shenischayev lalis biyade basar chazir v'alu biyade basar tle tarn kapara v'slicha." Madach, someone who wanted to do basar tle, something innocuous, something neutral, and it was alu biyade basar chazir is chayev kapara. Ha mechaven lalis biyade basar chazir v'alu biyade basar chazir alachas kam v'kama ki yoytze b'davar ta'im. And the Gemara brings more of these. Now, the Gemara in Kedushin and the Fayalef and Beis brings a few actual stories of different Amiroim who, got fachapt with something that ultimately didn't turn out to be an aver, but it was nischav and lachabas chazir. And the Gemara tells us about the elaborate, intense tshuva that they undergone. So you see that this wasn't just, ivory tower, pie in the sky idea. Like Rabbi Akiva was musashmuz, like Bachar Rabbi Akiva Amar. This was something that was very relevant and gepaskint, that a person has to look at it like this. Like it's nischav and lachabas chazir. You bear some culpability. You need a kapara for that. That's not something you can just look the other way. So it says the Makar Chaim, even if I'm going to tell you that Chayshim Mishpat Deki Pater, Zichr, there's some sort of culpability within Ishmael, you need to have a tshuva. It says as follows: here's my raya, me Yosef she'amar la'achav. Yosef tells his brothers, Kasher higidul le'ata sana lefesha avdi lekei avicha, v'ksiva yermilam Yosef. Yosef says, Al tiru hatachas lekimani. He says, Yosef tells them, don't be afraid. When the Shvatim said they owe him, Yosef, don't be afraid of hatachas lekimani. Elikim chashav alatayva. Hashem wanted this. Hashem treated this was a good thing that ended up happening. I got sent here to prepare for Klal Yisrael, to prepare for Yaakov and the Shvatim to come here. We needed this. Elikim chashav alatayva. He says, Alma ach sha'achiv kivnu l'ra lahazik oisei. Even though his brothers wanted to be mazikim, Heishalim Yosef ani bedin she'eni bedin she'enish lechem. Yosef told them, I have no right to punish you. Kivin shebali tovim mizeh. It ended up being good. Rak bedin shemayim atam mechoivim. Yosef said, Atachas elikim ani. I'm not punishing you for Einshe Shemayim. Dine Shemayim, you settled that with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's not I don't have to deal with that. Between me and you did a good thing. Alakim chashav alateva. V'zein shayach li ki atachas alakim anoichi. Yetzelanu adin, he says, kol makam she'achar kivan lasses l'chaveri hezik eira v'napach l'toiva as patim din yadim v'chayiv v'din Shemayim. He says, hayotze l'gabe the shayla that I'm handling, you see from the Gemaras, all over the various Gemaras, and including the story of Yosef HaTzadik, that there's a, you're patim din yadim v'chayiv v'din Shemayim. Now, what comes out is that in this tshuva, he's relying upon the narrative that's described in the Midrashim and the Piyutim that say that the Einish of Yosef was pending. There was an Einish that was pending, a Dina Shemayim Einish that was pending, that needed to be resolved, that was resolved many days later. Meaning this whole formula that he's using to extract from the Psukim of Yosef's conversation with his brothers relies upon the fact that we see Chazal, not Chazal, but later Midrashim and whatever, refer to this as as an open tab, a pending aver that needed to be resolved. Now, the tshuva the Ben Yishleim goes through it, and he has a lot of hanaf from the shaila. I wonder if the shaila is a real shaila, a fake shaila, but he has a lot of hanaf from the Meduber. He says, Kol ki hani mal yasa yisamru b'shmi. It's beautiful. The minute you asked me the shaila, I started thinking about it, and I looked at tshuva, and every gemara that I thought of you already quoted, he really likes the discussion. He likes the tshuva. And then he has a fascinating thing that he says in the middle of the tshuva. He says, V'zakar of l'shleishim v'arba shana. If we have time, we could go into some of his, he has little tidbits and nuances, things that he adds that are very nice. But I just want to, this nakuda. He says, Zakar of l'shleishim v'arba'am shana. He says, it's 34 years since I said this drush. I don't know where or what. He says, since I said this drush. He says, Ashabiyarti b'zadiver abraisi de kedushin. One second, here. Yeah, Shibirati b'zadiver abraisi de kedushin. The Rakiva k'shayim megi l'mikra hazeh. The Isha hefir of Hashem Yisachla. Haye boicha v'aymer mishnah schav and lachla says this brayse in kedushin. I just read it from the Gemara in Nazir, but it's in both places that Rakiva would cry. He says ve'etzrach lahavin. He says I have 4 kashas on this brayse that need explaining. He says first of all, he says why did Rabbi Akiva take this personal? Now this is a kasha that's only a kasha if you have a teretz. Because whatever, you can ask this anything, right? I'm saying, why does one person like Rabbi Akiva,
There's always a laugh.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So you're sharpening the kasha. Okay, that's very nice. He doesn't say that. That's very nice. Yeah, sharpening the kasha. What do you say? Yeah, exactly. Oh, very nice. Okay, so okay. Now, good point. Well, yeah, ask him. He says, why did this bring Rabbi Akiva to tears? Why was this Rabbi Akiva's drush? This brought him to tears. He says, Beis yesh ladaktik demahi nitzach Rabbi Akiva lilmud B'nischav lechol basa chazir v'ala biyada basa chazir mikav v'chaymer. Harizil kri beis ravu. Misha achol basa chazir over milav pshita tzarach kapara. Like, of course you need a kapara for that. What's the kavachaymer? Like what's the shikatay that Rabbi saying over here? That Rabbi Kiva is saying, he says Gimel, he says Ma'u alashim v'ala biyada basa chazir v'ala biyada. Have a little name of v'achol basa chazir. It wasn't Allah biyada. A person was nischav lechol basa chazir v'ala biyada. Like what does it mean v'ala biyada? Dalid ma'ishna basa chazir. The knock at Mishari Surim. Why are we saying Chazir Dafka? Saying Nevel is much more common. And these are questions, all of them are questions that are good questions if you have an answer. They're questions that are meant to. And he says, V'marti liyashiv hakol b'chal demachta be'ezes Hashem. At a blick, he says. He says, Hina yedua da'asara haruge malchus hayebechet shemachiris Yosef. Everybody knows, the Welt knows, from all these midrashim, all these piyutim, the Welt knows that asara haruge malchus was bimkaim the mechiris Yosef. This was your question originally. And this is why the number is 10, not 9, is because the Shvatim were Mitzayar for Kadosh Baruch Hu, the V'havi Asara. Rashi b'chumash. B'yalkut Mishlei Isa, the B'chol Dar V'dar Ne'erag and Asara Tzadikim B'shvil Chet Mechiris Yosef. The Yalkut Mishlei, it says in every generation, 10 Tzadikim are put to death for the Chet Mechiris Yosef. Ubizman Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. Now here's how he answers the questions we were discussing. Bizman Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol for Shimon Gamliel, which is during the time of the Chorban. Haya'od Shmainach Le'adin and Maninu. There was another 8. We just don't know who they were. They weren't as important. Oid Le'ich Shuvin Kolkach. Mishmach Le'ich Hashivlu. Bizman Rabbi Akiva, which is 70 years later. Haya'od Tisha. There was another 9. Chem Bizman Rabbi Chanin Ben Chadin. There was another 9 with him. Every one of these generations says Bizen Estalak HaKosheh Shemakshina Olam V'le Bekinus Le'chashivkim Shiva V'gam Le'her Bizman Echad. Says this answers all the Velt's kashas that we opened up with about the kinnis and then the slichas and how it stems. Says Alfidaver Ayalkut Nestalak Kol HaKosheh. Says V'isa B'Sefer Megala Amukas Ter Rakiva Kapara Bavor Shchina. The Sefer Megala Amukas says that Rakiva was like we know, Rakiva is the most legendary amongst the Tanaim. Rakiva was becoming the Shchina. He says. Now he says like this. Rabbi Akiva was aware of this Messiah. In hindsight, hindsight's 2020. Rabbi Akiva was aware of the Messiah, that there is an einish that's on Klal Yisrael's head. There's an avera that needs to be resolved in every generation, he says. But who chashiv, the haya chashiv, shalai haya b'zeh avera gedel kol kach, shum delikim chashav l'tayver. Rabbi Akiva said, no. How big of this an avera could it be? It ended up being a good thing. He didn't really, the Yosef wasn't really harmed from this. Okay, yeah, the Shvat did something, but it wasn't Yana Grace Aver, he says. So there'll be an Einish. Well, there'll be an Einish, Epis an Einish, but it's not going to be the highest stake. The Hilkach Achdi Yada Dahayim Asar Shebdar Tzrichel Lekabel Einish. Rabbi Akiva was under no illusions. He knew that he was definitely on the list. If there's a list of 10 tzaddikim who are going to get punished for the dar, Rabbi Akiva knew he was on the list. He didn't, like various. Oh, yeah, that's true, but we don't know what. Yeah, this is early in Uzziah. Yeah, we don't know when that exactly, but Rabbi Akiva knew he was on the list. Shalchash, B'Shalem. Rabbi Akiva L'Chayr on his own knew that he was right. Rabbi Akiva knew who he was. He wasn't Fadimin. So Rabbi Akiva knew he was on the list. He says, "Shebedar tzrichim lekabel einish avorchat shemachir zayis mikol makom vayasaver sheinish lo yigadol kolkach." Tzarich l'harag kiddush Hashem. He didn't think the einish would be as a grace that have to be harag al kiddush Hashem. Rabbi Akiva she'igia lemikra hazeh, when he got to this pasuk hayabaycha, when he realized this thing in the pasuk, that ma'amish and eschaven lechol basa chazir v'ala biyade basa tlat tzarich kapara, he realized, oimik hadin. He realized it's a big deal. The fact that Yosef told them, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem chashav l'teva, did not at all mean that the Shvatim were off the hook. He realized that just meant Yosef can't enforce it. It's not an enforceable punishment. I can't give you a punishment for what you're doing, but you're b'chlal not off the hook. It's a very chamura that's going to need an einish chamura. It says Bachar Rabbi Akiva was very personal. Rabbi Akiva understood that he's been the Shechina. He's the what do you call it? He's the headliner. There's the undercard, and he's the headliner. He knew that this is going to be a dramatic Mesiras Nefesh of the highest order, like Rabbi Akiva Taka, went through in his life, which is why Rabbi Akiva, what do you say? Masai, exactly. Which is why Rabbi Akiva says, Akiva knew. At a certain point in Rabbi Akiva's life, Rabbi Akiva knew. Maybe it's after the conversation with Rabbi Eliezer in the Gemara Sanhedrin. Maybe it's when he had this drasha. Maybe it's the confluence of them two together. Rabbi Akiva knew that this was what was going to be charted out for him. And he said, Masai Yav Eliyadav Akamena. I'm waiting. We talked about this a few weeks ago, but not that he was zuching it ois. Exactly. Not that we talked about this a few weeks ago, not that he was zuching it ois, like trying to hetz it on, but in a certain sense, Rabbi Akiva knew he was playing with house money. He knew, meaning you want to fatach maybe Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva knew it was coming. Rabbi Akiva knew this was coming. So when the Romans came and said you can't learn Torah, Rabbi Akiva said, I'm going to do what I got to do. Let the chips fall where they may, because I know. Rabbi Akiva knew already that. Yeah, Asher Achashen, it's fasted. It's shtim, so many Gemara shtim beautifully. He doesn't bring every single one of them, but so many Gemara shtim beautifully with this idea. Rabbi Akiva knew his destiny. Rabbi Akiva was not mashmash ba'afela. What do you say? It's mashma, it still is. Mashma, it still is. What do you say? Every year, every dar, whatever it is. Magal Mukas says every dar, but it's whatever it is, it's mashma that it's still. So this is his word. So he says, he answers all his kashas over here. And he says, why dafka chazir? He says, because asidim chazir l'tayr k'mashev b'sfarim. Chazir is ultimately going to become mutter. So chazir is like this. It's to show you oimek hadin, to show you something that's going to be chashav l'tayva. It's eventually going to be good, but right now it's bad. You do something bad, even if later it's going to be good. It's in ganzen bad. It's a big obligation, a big chiyuv. This is how the Binyan Shleima. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece that he does over here. Now, what he's doing is he's taking these midrashim and this agada and this kilu havana of the Sarug Malchus and mamish bringing it to life. Like he's bringing it to life that you want to know exactly the list or when it happened, or meaning he dissipates the entire question of how to look at kilu 23 versions of it or 6 versions in the Medrash or 23 versions in the Piyut. It's like it's not so integral which version exactly happened. We don't even have to know per se. Klal Yisrael knew and Rabbi Akiva Baroshim knew that there's a Messiah, that this Avera is not paid back. It's an Avera that needed to be resolved. Whether it's Begilgul, whether it's not Begilgul, whether it's this list, whether it's another list, whether it's these 10 or those 10, it's not li kuva into the discussion once the Binyan Shleima is done with it. So now, to me, yeah, okay, you can't answer every, no, maybe they didn't know. They didn't know, are we them? But Rabbi Akiva Zichar knew the way he's charting it out, and like everyone's pointing out, so many Gemara shtim beautifully. If Rabbi Akiva, was kilu knowing about his destiny. Now, Yich Shia, to me, it's fascinating because it resolves kilu a big mess in these late midrashim and piyutim that seem to be so seiser each other and so not thing. What he does over here is a beautiful way of just like putting it, reframing it. It's a different angle, a different conversation. And what to me was fascinating is that, and I could show you, I don't know how many examples of piyutim playing a role halacha. Meaning, I think there's a famous quip from the Briskurav. The Briskurav said, "Klal Yisrael paskins like the siddur." It's a klar zach. Klal Yisrael paskins like the siddur. Anything that's in the siddur is psak. And this piyut, Sayin Yom Kippur and Sayin Tisha B'Av and Sayin, all the different kreiser of Klal Yisrael from literally all walks of life, has come to form like a certain bedrock in the Havana of it. Ad kedei kach that it plays a role in this halacha shal that the Binyan Shleima and Rechaim Seglowitz are discussing. Now, I think tomorrow we'll continue Rabbi Akiva. We'll do I know we talked about him already and we talked about him more now, but we'll talk about even a little more.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.